So this set of videos is going to talk about fungus. And fungus is going to be its own kingdom, and that's because they have a couple of characteristics that are going to make them unique. First being that they're heterotrophs, so that means that they cannot make their own food. So they're not going to be in the plant category because they can't do that. They're also, so the way that they're going to get their nutrients is they're going to release these enzymes, and that's going to kind of do this external digestion, and then they can suck up the nutrients. Kind of nasty. They're also going to have these type of cells called hyphal cells. And if you've ever split apart a mushroom, you know how it's in like those strings? That's because of the hyphal cells. So they kind of are going to connect end to end. And that's going to be something that's going to be specific to fungi. Another thing that they can do is they can have what's called a dikaryon stage. So what's going to happen is you'll have, they don't really have male and female, they have positive and negative, which is basically the same thing. And so they're going to grow next to each other, and eventually they're going to fuse together, and temporarily they're going to be two separate nuclei, and then the nuclei are going to fuse together. So that's called a dikaryon stage. They're also going to have walls that are going to have chitin in them. Chitin is the same stuff that's found in the exoskeleton of like lobsters and insects and stuff like that. And then the last thing that's going to put them in this category is they go through nuclear mitosis. So all those phases of mitosis you learned about, like prophase, metaphase, anaphase, those all happen inside the nucleus. Then the nucleus splits, and then the actual cell splits. So that's a little bit different from what you're used to as far as like the typical mitosis goes. Okay, so as far as the morphology of these guys, there's a lot of diversity. So included in the kingdom fungi is going to be yeast, and so yeast are going to just be these single-celled organisms that we use for different things we'll talk about in a little bit. And then you can have the multicellular forms. You can have molds, you can have mushrooms, all sorts of things like that. But one thing that they're going to have are these hyphal cells called hyphae, and those are going to make those long filaments. And in between them, they're going to have septa, and septa is just going to be a wall that divides them. And in science, anytime you hear septum, that's going to be some sort of a dividing wall. Like in your nose, you have a septum, if you've ever heard of a deviated septum, right? So anytime you have some sort of a wall separating stuff. Now, what can happen is those hyphal cells can actually grow into a substrate and kind of anchor the growing fungus. And so when it does that, we call that a mycelium. And I believe I've got pictures of this to show you. So yeah, here's your hyphal cells in the mushroom, and then you can see the mycelium growing into the substrate below them. So hyphal cells are going to look like that. You can see some septa, right? And then here's some mycelium tissue growing into a substrate. So that's going to be their kind of body morphology. Now, as far as the way that they reproduce, they're going to be a little bit different because, like I said, they're going to fuse together and temporarily have two separate nuclei. So we call it monokaryotic when they only have one nucleus, and then it's dikaryotic when they have two. And then as far as the dikaryotic stuff goes, you can either be heterokaryotic or homokaryotic. So heterokaryotic would be if you had two separate types of fungus growing, and then they grow next to each other, and then they fuse together. So those are two different organisms. But sometimes you can have a fungus that just kind of grows into itself, and that would be homokaryotic, okay? So like I said, the sexual reproduction is going to be where you have the hyphae of two opposite mating types fusing together. So that'd be like the positive and the negative coming together. They can reproduce asexually, which you've probably heard of before, and that they're going to do that using spores. Now, as far as the way that they're going to get their nutrients, like I said, they are not autotrophs, they're heterotrophs. And so what they're going to do is secrete those enzymes into whatever it is that they're growing on and then suck up the nutrients that way. So we call that external digestion. Now, what's kind of crazy is we can use those metabolic pathways for our advantage. So we can use it to make wine and cheese and beer and all of those lovely things that make life so awesome. So yeasts are going to be the ones that are going to help us to do that. And so yeasts are going to go through the process of fermentation. You're going to feed them sugars, and they're going to create alcohol and CO2 as a byproduct. And so that could be used for flavoring, that could be used to make dough rise, all of those different things. We use them to flavor like Coca-Cola, and so that's aspergillus that we use to do that. We can use them for antibiotics, like if you think about penicillium, that's going to fight bacteria. And then we can also use them for bioremediation. There's a lot of mushrooms that they can use that will actually help to soak up oil and oil spills. So now they're using those like crazy, and it's really helping with all these terrible things that are happening out there. So in the next video, we'll get into the ecology of fungus.